I'm John Horrigan, and this is a special edition recorded for the Eastern Ohio Bigfoot Investigation Center on the Abominable Snowman. Well, everybody has heard tales of the Abominable Snowman, Yeti, Yeren, Chinese Wild Man, whatever you want to call it, Chuchuchna. But sightings of the mysterious animals occur all over the world, not only at high elevations, but in the lowlands as well. From China, tales of wild men or man-beasts appeared in the mid-70s as strange encounters with unknown creatures were reported from Hubei and Shanxi provinces, forested, mountainous country in northern China. A dramatic encounter was reported by 33-year-old Pang Genshang. Genshang was a commune leader. His encounter occurred in June of 1977. He was chopping wood in the Tabai Mountains of central Shanxi province when he saw a hairy man. It came closer and closer. He got scared and kept retreating until his back was against a stone cliff and he couldn't go any further. The hairy man came up to about 7 or 8 feet and then to about 5 feet from him. He raised his axe, ready to fight for his life. They stood like that for a timeless moment, neither moving. Then the man groped for a stone and threw it at the wild beast. It hit him in the chest. He uttered several howls and rubbed the spot with his left hand. Then he turned left and leaned against a tree, and then slowly ambled away towards the bottom of a gully. He kept making a mumbling sound. In 1974, a Nepalese girl was guarding a herd of yaks at about 14,000 feet altitude in the mountains near Mount Everest. Well, according to the girl, she was attacked by a Yeti, and in 1978, Lord and Lady Hunt, revisiting Nepal to commemorate the 1953 ascent of Everest, saw and photographed large tracks in the snow around their huts. From the Soviet Union comes tales of the Yeren, or Almas. 39-year-old Muhammad Tomakov, a farm manager, who in 1946 caught an almas in a mountain hut at Getmish. The creature was man-like but covered with hair and ran on all fours, standing on its hind legs whenever it stopped. Sometimes, but not often, American Bigfeet have been seen running on all fours. Once the creature was safely inside the hut, Tomakov latched the door and went to get a rope. When he returned, the door was open and the hut empty. The Pamir Mountains on the southern border of the Soviet Union are another haunt for the Abominable Snowman. The mountains are a northwesterly extension of the Himalayas. In the summer of 1979, a Soviet expedition found footprints 13.5 inches long and 6.5 inches wide. But no one actually saw the creature. In early 1961, a hunter living near the river Ob saw 2 such creatures when they came out of the forest one evening while he was walking with his dogs. The dogs ran off in terror but were not harmed. Dogs are usually frightened by these unknown monsters. In America, Bigfeet seem to dislike dogs and have been known to injure or even kill them. Well, the Siberian hunter noted that the wild men were covered with dark hair, had long arms, and turned their feet outwards when walking. Their eyes glowed dark red, yet another characteristic similar to Bigfeet. In 1920, a Chuchuchna, a name meaning outcast given to the man-beast in the Yakutat region of eastern Siberia, was seen by villagers out berry picking. It was also picking berries and stuffing them into its mouth with both hands. On catching sight of us, he stood up to his full height. He was very tall and looked to appear to be over 7 feet. He looked to be dressed in a deerskin, and he had very long arms and a mop of unkempt hair. His face was as big as a human's. His forehead was small and protruded over his eyes like the peak of a cap. His chin was large and broad, far bigger than a human's. Other than that, being a little taller, he was very much like a human. One of the most popular explanations of the Yeti's origins is that it is descended from the giant ape Gigantopithecus, whose fossilized remains have been found in India and in China. Examination of the fossils indicate that Gigantopithecus lived between 12 million and 500,000 years ago. Also during this period, the Himalayas were rising by as much as 8,000 to 10,000 feet. Because of this increase in height of the mountains, many species of animals, including the Yeti's ancestor, may have become isolated. Some experts argue that though the Yeti's footprints have been discovered above the snow line, a bare terrain that is unable to support a large mammal, its present home is actually lower down in the forested valleys. Here, vegetation is dense, a fog is common, and there are few human inhabitants to disturb the Yeti. But as a result of seasonal and climatic changes, they must sometimes cross the high snow passes to reach nearby valleys, and they leave those telltale footprints. In 1889, in northeast Sikkim, which is near Nepal, Major Lawrence Austin Waddell of the Indian Army Medical Corps found large footprints in the Himalayan snows at 17,000 feet. In his book Among the Himalayas, 1899, he wrote, "These were alleged by his Sherpa porters to be the trail of the hairy wild men who are believed to live amongst the eternal snows, along with the mythical white lions whose roar is reputed to be heard during storms. The belief in these creatures is universal among Tibetans." Lieutenant Colonel C.K. Howard Bury and his companions, making their way from Karta to Lakpala in Tibet on the first Everest reconnaissance expedition in 1921, saw several dark shapes moving about in a snowfield far above them. On September 22, 1921, when they reached the place where the creatures had been, they saw, at more than 20,000 feet up, numbers of enormous footprints. Lieutenant Colonel Howard Bury stated that at first they looked human, yet they were about 3 times the size of normal human footprints. Then he declared that they must have been made by a very large stray gray wolf. But several creatures had been seen. The Sherpa porters were sure the tracks had been made by an upright semi-human they called Meitei, or Meitei Kangmi, which means snow or wild creature. A journalist later gave it the appellation Abominable Snowman. According to the Sherpa legend, the snowman is a huge, hairy, half-man, half-beast that lives in caves high in the mountains. It is bow-legged, its ape-like arms reach down to its knees, and it is so muscular that it can rip up trees by the roots. The body hair is thick and dark, but the face appears to be white and humanoid. Ordinarily, the creatures feed off of yaks and snowworms, but when the desperately hungry go down into the valley, they end up carrying off human beings. And thus begins an avalanche of intriguing snowman stories. As Russian troops penetrated the soaring Vanch Mountains of the Pamirs in pursuit of White Army soldiers in 1925, they heard stories from the local peoples of beast men who lived in the higher reaches. The soldiers also found footprints and other evidence of some man-like beings. Then one day, they shot one. The red soldiers had fired into a cave where they thought the whites were hiding. To their surprise, a wild, hairy creature ran out, crying inarticulately, and was killed instantly by the blazing machine guns. Looking at the corpse, the leader, General Mikhail Stepanovich Topilsky, thought at first it was that of an ape. "It was covered with fur," he said, "but I knew there were no apes in the Pamirs, and moreover, the body looked far more human than ape-like, indeed fully human." On closer examination and investigation, however, their medical officer declared otherwise. The creature was not a man. But what was it? Could the wild thing they had shot been the snowman? The corpse, that of a male, was about 5.5 feet long and covered with dense grayish-brown hair except for the face. There were a few straggly hairs in the upper lip, had hair on the ears, palms, knees, feet, and buttocks. The skin on the hands, knees, and feet was coarse and thickly calloused. The face was dark, with dark eyes, a heavy sloping brow, prominent cheekbones, a flattened nose, and a massive lower jaw. Although the teeth were quite large, they seemed to be those of a human, and the creature had a broad, unusually muscular chest, but otherwise its torso was much like that of a man. Unable to carry the body with them down the steep slopes, the soldiers covered it with a pile of stones, the body never to be recovered. As reports of sightings accumulate, it seems that there may be 3 distinct types of Yeti in the Tibetan Himalayan region: small, large, and extra large, all or none which may be related to America's Bigfoot. The Yeti has also been sensationalized out of all proportions of reality. To the Sherpas, there is nothing mysterious about it. The creature has been part of their lives and lore for at least 200 years. Himalayan villagers and hunters include it as just another animal when discussing local fauna. It seems elusive. It is because its habitat lies far from human paths. Himalayan hunters say that the Yeti is not a man, nor does it live in the snow zone. Its home is in the highest Himalayan forests, deep and almost impenetrable thickets. It reputedly moves about on all fours or swings from tree to tree. When it ventures into the snow area where mountaineers may glimpse it or its tracks, it walks upright with a rolling gait. The Sherpas suggest that its reason for crossing the snow-covered fields is to seek a saline moss that grows in the rocks of moraines. Ivan Sanderson says that it is not the moss that they seek, but lichens, which are rich in food value and nutrients. Stationed in Dagestan, autonomous Soviet Socialist Republic during the last 3 months of 1941, a Soviet Army lieutenant colonel named Viktor S. Karapetyan was asked by local authorities to examine a man captured in the mountains near Bunyansk. A strange-looking individual, the captive was suspected of being a disguised spy. It was hoped that Karapetyan, a medical officer, would be able to determine whether or not the suspect was wearing a disguise. As the colonel reported, "I can still see the creature as it stood before me, a male, naked and barefooted. And it was doubtlessly a man because its entire shape was human. The chest, back and shoulders, however, were covered with shaggy hair of a dark brown color. The man stood absolutely straight with his arms hanging, and his height was above the average, about 6 feet. He stood before me like a giant, but his mighty chest was thrust forward. His fingers were thick and strong and exceptionally large. On the whole, he was considerably bigger than any of the local inhabitants. His eyes told me nothing. They were dull and empty and lifeless, the eyes of an animal. When kept in a warm room, he sweated profusely. While I was there, some water and then some food was brought up to his mouth, and someone offered him a hand, but there was no reaction. I gave the verbal conclusion that this was no disguised person, but a wild man of some kind. No doubt he would have been surprised to learn that such creatures were quite well known in the Caucasus, named the Kaptar. A compelling piece of evidence in the case for the Yeti was discovered on November 8, 1951, by British mountaineers Eric Shipton and Michael Ward. The two climbers, returning from a reconnaissance expedition on Everest, were exploring the southwestern slopes of the Menlung Glacier when they came upon a fresh trail of enormous but human-looking footprints leading along the edge of an ice mass. Shipton photographed the trail, and close-ups of one particularly crisp imprint indicate a not-quite-human foot about 13 inches long and considerably broader than a mountain boot. This would suggest a biped about 8 feet tall. It must have been limber, too, because where the tracks crossed a crevasse, Shipton wrote, one could see quite clearly where the creature had jumped and used its toes to secure purchase on the snow on the other side. According to the Communist Chinese news agency, a Chinese film director named Pai Hsien of the Chinese People's Army Film Studies saw a pair of strange two-legged creatures in the Pamir Mountains in 1954. The exact location is unknown. Returning from a filming trip to the Himalayas, Pai Hsien and 3 colleagues were traveling at an elevation of about 19,600 feet very early one morning when they saw 2 unfamiliar upright figures walking, one behind the other, up a slope not far from them. They were short, walked with their backs hunched, and moved among the rocks with ease. The men shouted and fired shots into the air, but the 2 figures paid no attention and were soon lost from view. The film director later said that he had heard many reports about wildmen in the Pamir mountain region. The women of a village in the sparsely settled East China province of Zhejiang had a close encounter with an ape man one May afternoon in 1957 when all the local men were laboring in the hills. Zhu Fudi, hearing a scream from her young daughter, rushed out to where the girl had been tending cattle and saw her struggling in the grip of an ape-like creature about 4 feet 9 inches tall. The mother grabbed a stick of wood and flailed frantically at the creature. It sprang into a paddy field and tried to run, but was hampered by the mud. Zhu Fudi hit it again before it could turn to attack her. By that time, a crowd of excited women had arrived on the scene, and about a dozen joined Zhu Fudi in beating the animal into a stupor. But it was not quite dead. It recovered, and tears in its eyes began to grunt. This time the women killed it. Later they cut it to pieces, and the next day heard woeful gruntings from the hills. The Sanyang Daily made inquiries and subsequently described the creature as a young male weighing about 88 pounds and covered with long, dark, brown hair. Its chest was big, its nose sunken, its teeth white, the tongue, ears, and eyebrows human-like, and the navel, genitals, and calves were similar to a man's, and the skin under the hair was soft and white. A young biology teacher from a nearby village took away the creature's hands and feet and carefully preserved them. Conducting field work in the isolated valleys of the Caucasus in the 1960s, Professor Jean Josephina Kaufman came running close to death with a hairy, upright creature known as Almas. Professor Kaufman and her team collected hundreds of eyewitness reports from peasants, villagers, tea pickers, and haymakers of an almost human being with a receding brow and chin, flat nose, flat feet, and a coat of reddish or black body hair. One day they made an unprecedented discovery. 2 nests or animal lairs shaped out in the midst of tall, ordinarily impenetrable weeds in a larder nearby. In the pile of food were 2 pumpkins, some blackberries, 8 potatoes, part of a sunflower, 3 apple cores, and a half-chewed corn cob. Mixed in with these items were a few pellets of horse dung, a delicacy said to be enjoyed by the Almas because of its salt content. Other corn cobs, found later, showed the imprints of near-human teeth from a jar of a non-human width. On a dark night in May 1976, 6 Communist Party officials were being transported through southern Hubei province in central China when the driver of their jeep suddenly saw a large hairy animal on the road ahead. The driver blew the horn, and the creature started to clamber up a steep slope but skidded back down to the road. It crouched there on all fours, staring into the headlights with the look of a wild man. The driver stopped but kept honking, and his passengers got out to surround the creature at a safe distance. One tossed a stone at it. The creature rose to its hind legs, lumbered off into a gully, and then scrambled up a slope into the woods. The men agreed afterward that the creature had fine, soft hair like a camel's, with a dark red streak down on its back, and the face the color of flax. The legs were long and thick, the thighs heavy, and the soles of the feet were so soft that the animal made no sound while walking. The face was long, broad across the brow, and narrow at the chin, and had a wide mouth. Although the creature had vanished long before the investigators arrived to study it, an anthropologist with the Peking Museum of Natural History, Mr. Zhu Guoxing, suggests that it might well have been a distant relative of the Abominable Snowman or Bigfoot. Gong Yulan is a peasant woman who lives in the Kuaishang commune in Hubei province, central China. And June 19, 1976 was a day like any other, except that Gong Yulan had run out of grass for her pigs, so she took her 4-year-old son and climbed up a mountain to gather a supply. As mother and son crossed a pass, they saw a large, huge, moving red object about 20 feet away. The woman stopped and stared at what turned out to be a strange, hairy animal rubbing its back against a tree. Later, in an interview with scientists, she described how it had scratched itself. It stood just like a man like this, she said, demonstrating by rubbing her shoulder against a wall. Watching it, she became frightened by its strangeness. She scooped up her child and ran. To her horror, the creature came bolting after her, uttering cries that sounded like, "Ya, ya!" Well, with child in arms, Gong Yulan ran a 1/4 mile to the house of her commune brigade leader. His wife, who met her at the door, recalled, "When Gong arrived at my house, the beads of sweat on her forehead were as big as soybeans. She kept saying, 'Wild man.'" Hairs were subsequently recovered from the tree against which the creature had scratched itself and were examined at the Beijing Medical Institute. It was decided that the hairs were not from a bear but resembled those of a higher primate, including man. The mountainous region of Shenanxia, near the intersections of the Hubei, Shaanxi, and Sichuan provincial borders, was so often the scene of hairy creature sightings during 1976 that the Chinese Academy of Sciences in Peking decided to organize a search. In March of 1977, it sent out a 110-member expedition consisting of biologists, zoologists, photographers, and soldiers equipped with rifles, tranquilizer guns, tape recorders, cameras, and dogs. Mr. Zhu Guoxing of the Peking Museum of Natural History was put in charge of scientific research for the expedition. As reported by the New York Times, the search party persisted for 8 months, and although it failed to capture one of the ape-like creatures, the expedition did see one at close range and gathered enough other evidence to substantiate its existence. Many footprints, 12 to 16 inches long, were found. Feces, sometimes found beside the footprints and presumed to be from the creature, was analyzed and found to be from neither a human nor a bear. According to Mr. Zhu, the hair samples believed to have come from the animal and found stuck to tree bark suggested that it is some sort of higher primate. From accumulated evidence included purported witnesses, Mr. Zhu described the creature as about 6 feet 6 inches tall, covered with wavy red hair, with the hair on its head falling nearly to its waist. It walks upright, he said, and its footprints show that it has no arch, hence a clumsy gait. The 3 smallest of its 5 toes are not completely separated, he said, and because of this it may have the ability to grasp things with its feet. No tail has been detected, but some witnesses said breasts were distinguishable. The creature is believed to be omnivorous, but is said to prefer walnuts and chestnuts, tender young leaves and roots, and insects. While no recording exists of its calls, those who have heard it say it emits one long and one short cry. More tantalizing evidence of the elusive Nepalese Yeti was found during the British Hinko expedition of 1979, after mountaineers John Edwards and John Allen spotted a possible campsite at almost 17,000 feet on their way down to base camp. On November 10, 1979, Edwards noticed an overhanging boulder that formed a natural cave. He motioned Allen to wait while he took a closer look. He was astounded to see a set of almost human-like footprints in the snow. As Dr. Allen came to join him, both men were startled by a piercing, chilling, inhuman scream that lasted 5 or 10 seconds. Edwards and Allen decided that they must be in the vicinity of an abominable snowman. The next day, the whole team, led by John White, returned to the site and photographed the still distinct footprints with their BBC camera. The tracks were of varying sizes, suggesting a pair of perhaps even a small family of creatures. Droppings found near the prints were gathered to be taken back to England for analysis. We have photographed this print, says White, and that one can satisfactorily identify. I am convinced that this is not an animal. Up there is not yet recorded by naturalists. An author's note, the photograph with the cigarette pack next to the footprints is the White photograph. In a sequel to the Chinese incidents of the previous decades, a team of scientists scoured Zhejiang province late 1980 for solid evidence of living ape men. At the Bihu Middle School in Lishui County, Chinese investigators obtained from biology teacher Zhu Shushang the well-preserved hands and feet of the ape-like creature routed by Zhu Fundi in 1957. Apart from some shrinkage of the muscles, the remains were in relatively good condition. Their hair, which was covered with soft yellowish-brown fur, measured about 7.5 inches in length, and the palms of the hands about 5.5 inches. It was agreed that the animal was probably a primate and possibly akin to a chimpanzee. Exploring the woods and hills of Zhejiang with a local 60-year-old herb picker for a guide, the team actually found something like a small stockade at an elevation of about 5,000 feet. Wedged between trees and a rock, the structure was made of branches and lined with grass and leaves. The size of the branches broken from nearby trees suggested tremendous strength. The construction of the nest indicated an intelligence somewhat above that of an ape. Climbing yet higher, the team found 11 additional nests scattered over an area called Fangshuhang. Some of them were built in trees and others in the ground. And judging by their condition, as well as by nearby footprints and droppings, none of the nests were more than 2 years old. One appeared to have been built only a month ago. Samples of soft brown hair were also found. Other recently constructed nests were discovered near the rarely visited peak of Nine Dragon Mountains, along with prints of a left foot that measured 13 inches. The toes were separated like those of a human being. To the valley villagers, the findings came as no surprise. Zhang Qilin of Inkagli Valley says, "For the past 30 years or more, I have gone up to Nine Dragon Mountain every year in September or October to guard the maize crop against the ape men. I saw an ape man about 10 years ago. It approached from Fangshuhang. It was about as high as a house door, and it was covered with reddish-brown hair, with long hair falling around its shoulders and over its face. It walked upright. On another occasion, I saw an ape man lying in a nest in a tree. It was quite relaxed, and it clapped its hands when it saw me. Most of the time, it just lay there eating maize. There was a big pile of corn cobs on the ground." Equally unsurprised was Huang Zheling of Chenkang village, who had seen an ape man on August 14, 1978. It was carrying a piece of wood and walking through the forest about 65 feet away from Huang in the direction of Fangshuhang. Commenting on the creature's fondness for corn, Huang added casually, "We know that it also likes to eat persimmons and wild pears." What you're watching now is footage that emerged in 1996, allegedly by 2 Flemish hikers in the Himalayan regions. This is purportedly the first video of an abominable snowman. This aired first on Paranormal Borderline. The abominable snowman, or Yeti, is truly one of the great mysteries of the 20th century. It is a large, hairy biped that lives in the Himalayan region of Asia. Interest in the abominable snowman dates back to the 19th century. It's filled with mysteries great and small, and one of the most difficult to decipher. The creature is neither particularly abominable, nor does it necessarily live in the snows. Yeti is a Tibetan word which may apply either to a real or unknown animal of the Himalayas, or to a mountain spirit or demon. Nobody is quite sure which. After nearly half a century in which Westerners have tramped around looking for Yeti and asking all sorts of questions, the original native traditions concerning the creature have become even more muddled and confused. Early accounts of sightings of the Abominable Snowman are vague, untrustworthy, and far removed from their original sources, so it's virtually worthless as evidence. The modern story of this creature must really begin in 1925, when the experience of N.A. Tombazi, a Greek photographer who was serving as a member of the British Geographical Expedition in the Himalayas. Tombazi was camping at an altitude of 15,000 feet in the mountains of Sikkim, when his porters pointed to something odd moving across the lower slopes. The intense glare and brightness of the snow prevented me from seeing anything for the first few seconds, Tombazi recalled, but I soon spotted the object referred to about 200 to 300 yards away down the valley to the east of our camp. Unquestionably, the figure in outline was exactly that of a human being, walking upright and stopping occasionally to uproot or pull at some dwarf rhododendron bushes. It showed up dark against the snow, and as far as I could make out, it didn't wear any clothes. Within the next minute or so, it had moved into some thick scrub and was lost to view. Such a fleeting glimpse, unfortunately, did not allow me to set the telephoto camera or even to fix the object carefully with binoculars, but a couple of hours later during the descent, I purposely made a detour so as to pass the place where the man or beast had been seen. I examined the footprints, which were clearly visible on the surface of the snow. They were similar in shape to those of a man, but only 6 to 7 inches long by 4 inches wide at the broadest part of the foot. The marks of 5 distinct toes in the instep were perfectly clear, but the trace of the heel was indistinct, and the little that could be seen of it appeared to be narrowed down to a point. I counted 15 such footprints at regular intervals ranging from 1.5 to 2 feet. The prints were undoubtedly of a biped, the order of the spoor having no characteristics whatsoever of any imaginable quadruped. Dense rhododendron scrub prevented any further investigation as to the direction of the footprints. From inquiries I made a few days later, I gathered that no man had gone in that direction of the footprints since the beginning of the year. When I asked the opinion of the Cedar and the coolies, they naturally trotted out fantastic legends of Kanchchunga demons. Without in the least believing in these delicious fairy tales myself, notwithstanding the plausible yarns told by the natives, and the reference I have come across in many books, I am still at a loss to express any definitive opinion. However, I can only reiterate with a sufficient degree of certainty that the silhouette of the mysterious being was unmistakably identical with the outline of a human being. Tombazi's account is quoted at length, for in the opinion of many who have followed the Abominable Snowman legend, it is simply the best first-hand sighting available. Tombazi's honesty has never been questioned. He was an experienced observer, and his fleeting glimpse was combined with a close-up examination of footprints. One can only be sorry that he did not decide to take photos of the footprints. Tombazi himself did not forget the incident. In 1964, he wrote, "Although nearly 40 years have passed, I still carry a vivid impression of the glimpse I caught at the time, and I am convinced that the Yeti, in the form of a biped and not a quadruped, is in existence." There are, however, a number of points in this narrative which deserve additional comment. First, while 40 years after the event Tombazi talks of the Yeti in his original account, he speaks only of demons, which he calls delicious fairy tales. But more important are the footprints. Traditionally, the Abominable Snowman makes huge footprints, much larger than those of a man, but those described by Tombazi are actually smaller than would normally be made by a human foot. Then there is the general appearance of the creature. It was exactly like a human being, not at all lumbering. It was an ape-like monster that comes to mind when the word Yeti is mentioned. Tombazi says that the thing wasn't wearing any clothes, but he gives no indication if it was covered with hair, though admittedly he probably could not tell under the conditions. So what exactly did Tombazi see? Well, 40 years after the event, he spoke of the Yeti, but immediately after he made his sighting, he had another theory. I conjecture then that this wild man may either be a solitary or else a member of an isolated community of pious Buddhist ascetics who have renounced the world and sought their God in the utter desolation of some high place, as yet undesecrated by the world. However, perhaps I had better leave these conclusions to ethnological or other experts. There are Buddhist and Hindu ascetics who seek out the desolation of high places. They can live at altitudes of 15,000 feet and can train themselves to endure cold and other hardships that would kill the average person. They can walk and do things naked or nearly so in frigid mountain air. So Tombazi might really have seen a wandering ascetic as he first thought. That is a disappointing beginning to the Abominable Snowman story, but it is also quite typical, for the evidence that supports the existence of this creature has frequently been less solid than it first appears. The best piece of material evidence are photographs of footprints taken in 1951 by mountaineers Eric Shipton and Michael Ward on the southwestern slopes of the Menglungsay Glacier in the Himalayas. Shipton believed the prints he found to be those of a Yeti, and he followed the trail for about a mile until it disappeared in the hard ice. Unlike Tambazi, he took photos of his footprints. One of the pictures Shipton took shows a 5-toed print compared to the head of an ice axe. Another shows the print as being about the same size as a climbing boot, and thus much larger than the ordinary human foot. The Shipton photographs have been reprinted many times, often accompanied by another photo which shows a trail of prints. This was always assumed to be the trail of Yeti prints, but in 1973, primate expert John Napier revealed that the photo showed the trail made by a mountain goat. The picture had nothing to do with the Yeti footprints. It was simply taken by Shipton earlier on the same day he had found the footprints, and the negatives were presumably filed together, and that is how the confusion began. For years, nobody had bothered to correct the mistaken impression. The close-up footprint, the genuine Yeti print photo, has been the subject of a great deal of investigation and speculation. It certainly does not look like the footprints of any known animal, but footprints in the snow can be confusing. A print can melt, refreeze, and melt again, so that the shape and size of the original print can be greatly altered. Some have suggested that the prints were made by a group of small animals moving in unison in line across the snow. The leader breaks the trail, and the followers jump into the footprints of the lead animal, enlarging the original indentation. Melting and freezing would make the numerous small prints look like a single big one. This theory is rejected by most monster enthusiasts, but it is not entirely implausible. There were stories and even photographs of Yeti scalps that were kept in Tibetan monasteries and treated as sacred objects. The scalps had an odd peaked appearance, and that led to the theory that the Abominable Snowman had a ridge running down the middle of its skull. It was often said that the lamas who had charge of these scalps would not allow them to be handled by outsiders, thus they could never be examined closely. This was not the case, and close examination proved to be the downfall of the scalp. In 1960, Sir Edmund Hillary, the conqueror of Mount Everest, led a large expedition into the Himalayas. One of the announced purposes of the expedition was to search out information about the Abominable Snowman. Naturally, this sensational goal got a great deal of publicity. Not only did Sir Edmund fail to find the Yeti himself, his expedition destroyed what had up to then been one of the most intriguing bits of evidence, the Yeti scalps. Hillary was not allowed to examine one of the Yeti scalps, but he was able to bring it back with him to be examined by Western scientists. It didn't take long for the scientists to decide that this scalp didn't come from an unknown anthropoid, but that it was a fur hat made from the pelt of a rare Himalayan goat called the serow. A close examination of the 3 scalps considered to be the most genuine indicates that one appears to be a hat several hundred years old. Holes in it indicate where tassels or prayer flags were attached. The other 2 scalps are a fairly recent vintage. They are either deliberate fakes or simply fur hats that have been the subject of a case of mistaken identity. Sir Edmund Hillary, who was known for his outspokenness, roundly denounced the whole idea of the Yeti as nonsense. Monster buffs fought back, saying that Hillary's investigations had been slipshod, and that they had known the scalps were fake all the time, and that Hillary was just jealous because he had not found the creature. But there is no doubt that Hillary's denunciation hurt the international reputation of the Abominable Snowman. After the 1960 expedition, interest shifted to other monsters, particularly Bigfoot in the United States and Canada. What made Hillary particularly difficult for monster enthusiasts to handle was that monster skeptics are generally scientists tied to laboratories or universities. Sir Edmund Hillary, the great mountain climber, could hardly be criticized as being an armchair critic. The most celebrated encounter with a Soviet wild man took place in August of 1957, and the witness was a scientist, Alexander G. Pronin. Pronin was not looking for wild men. He was a hydrologist on an expedition to study the water resources of the Pamir Mountains. On August 12, 1957, at midday, I am following up a course of the valley of the river Balyandik, and I suddenly noticed a strange sight. On the southward slope of the valley, at a distance of approximately 500 meters, up on the permanent snow, a being of unusual aspect is moving, reminiscent of a man's figure, but with a strongly hunched back. Against the white background, it could be seen clearly that he was standing with his legs wide apart, and that his arms are longer than the ordinary man. In another account, Pronin describes the creature as being covered with reddish-gray hair. Well, I stood there not moving, and so 5 minutes elapsed, and then the figure vanished, hidden behind a rock. 3 days later, Pronin saw the figure again for a few minutes. A week later, one of the expedition's rubber boats disappeared mysteriously, and just as mysteriously was found a few miles upstream. The local inhabitants spoke vaguely of a wild man and of how common household utensils would sometimes disappear from around their homes and then be found way up in the mountains. Are these facts not linked with the loss of our boat? Asked Pronin. Stories of the Alma or wild man extend from the Pamirs and Caucasus in the west all the way to China, and they have been recorded for at least a century. N.M. Pazalski, discoverer of the Mongolian wild horse, collected stories of a wild man in his travels in Mongolia, 1881. In the early years of the century, a zoologist named Koklov had traveled widely in the regions of Dzungaria, between the Altai Mountains in the north and the Tian Shan Range in the south, and he had heard many wild stories from the Kazakh herdsmen. One man claimed to have taken part in the capture of a wild man and described the creature. He said it was a male of less than average human height, covered with brown to reddish hair, long arms reaching below his knees. Shoulders were stooped with a narrow, hollow chest, and his brow was sloped backwards from the bony crest projecting over his eyes. His lower jaw was massive and he was chinless. The nose was small and the nostrils wide and flared. The skin on his forehead, forearms, and knees were horny and calloused, and his legs were bent and bowed at the knees. His feet resembled human feet and were 1.5 times as broad. The toes were widely splayed, and the big toe was shorter than in the man and set apart from the others. This report comes from Central Asia, which tells of 2 travelers who were being led into the mountains by a local herdsman. Early one morning, the travelers saw a strange figure lurking near their horses. Thinking it was a horse thief, they took off after it and were able to capture it easily with their lassos. But what they caught was not truly human. The creature was about the height of an average man, but it was covered with hair just like a young camel. It had an ape-like face, and the feet resembled those of a human being, but were much larger. The creature was non-aggressive, and it squeaked miserably when caught. The herdsmen didn't seem very surprised at the strange captive, and they said it was a wild man, and that they were quite well known in the area and harmless. The travelers set the creature free, but followed it. They found the wild man lived in a sort of cave, a hollowed-out space beneath a cliff, which contained a bed made from straw and grass. This sighting of a Chinese wild man by Wang Zilin. Well, Wang had been viewing a model of Peking man in a museum when he was astonished by his companions by saying that he had seen that ape man. It happened in 1940. As Wang was traveling along a road in the Shenangjia region, he had heard gunshots in the distance. He got to the place where the shots had been fired and found a crowd surrounding the corpse of a wild man, or in this case a wild woman. The body was still supple and the stature very tall. The whole body was covered with a coat of thick grayish-red hair, which was very dense. Since it was lying face down, the more inquisitive among the passengers turned the body over to have a better look. It turned out to be a mother with a large pair of breasts. The face was narrow with deep-set eyes, while the cheekbones and lips jutted out. The appearance was very similar to the plaster model of a female Peking man. However, its hair seemed longer and thicker than that of the ape-man model. It was ugly because of the protruding lips. The Chinese report goes on to state that an investigation team was set up to collect accounts of meetings with the wild man, and had found over 100 of them from people in all walks of life. The team also collected specimens of hair, droppings, and footprints that were all supposed to be from the wild man. An analysis of this evidence, however, proved inconclusive. But the Chinese authors of the Wild Man paper are convinced that the creature does exist, and moreover, it is a descendant of the fossil giant ape of China, Gigantopithecus. Some people claim that Gigantopithecus has been extinct for a long time. Not necessarily. It is known to all that the giant panda, who was sharing weal and woe with the Gigantopithecus for a few million years, is still very much in existence and alive and well. Remember, the giant panda was not discovered until 1869. This is footage seen by a model in 1995 of Bigfoot in the Northwest. Well, that's all the time we have for tonight's show. I'm John Horrigan. This special program about the Abominable Snowman recorded exclusively for the EOBIC.